Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Please note that this AI-generated podcast is intended solely for general learning and educational purposes. While we strive to ensure accuracy, the AI may occasionally produce errors or incomplete information. We strongly encourage you to consult qualified professionals and conduct your own due diligence before making any legal, financial, or business decisions based on the content presented here. Also, if you find this content valuable, we kindly request you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to receive updates on future episodes. Let's begin.
That moment of breakthrough, sketching a totally new device or synthesizing some molecule that could change everything, maybe coding an algorithm that just flips a whole process on its head. That thrill, that spark, it's what pushes us forward, right?
Yeah.
But once you have that brilliant idea, that invention, how do you actually protect it? It's really not enough just to have it. Under the law, you've actually got to teach it. You need to explain it so well, so clearly, that other people can get it, can replicate it, maybe even build on your genius. So today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most vital and honestly often one of the trickiest parts of patent law, enablement. And this isn't just some, dry legal term buried in a textbook. It's the absolute bedrock requirement that your patent properly explains how to make and use your invention, the whole thing, so others in your field can actually do it. It's really the bridge between having a concept and having a legally solid IP right.
Exactly. And that's precisely our mission for this deep dive analysis, to really unpack this whole concept. We're going to be zeroing in on the foundational legal framework known as the in-re-wans factors. These are like the critical guideposts for figuring out if a patent provides enough teaching. What's really fascinating, though, is how these factors, which are decades old, suddenly got this renewed, powerful importance after the Supreme Court's huge 2023 decision in Amgen v. Sanofi. That case really set some new, firmer boundaries, especially for, groundbreaking biotech inventions. So we'll meticulously explore how courts actually apply these factors day to day, look at some really compelling case examples, both successes and failures, and maybe most importantly, try to give you a practical playbook, a set of real strategies for innovators trying to protect their IP effectively.
Yeah. So whether you're out there inventing or you're an entrepreneur trying to get a product off the ground, maybe a scientist pushing the limits, honestly, just someone who finds it fascinating how big ideas get protected and actually make it out into the world, understanding enablement is absolutely key. It's about making sure brilliant ideas aren't just claimed, but are genuinely shared in a way that actually fuels more innovation, without making people go through impossible amounts of trial and error just to follow your instructions. We really want you to walk away from this deep dive with a super clear understanding of what it takes to effectively claim an invention and, maybe just as important, how to dodge those common pitfalls that can just sink even a really promising patent. Okay, ready? Let's unpack this. So let's start right at the beginning. Fundamentally, what does a patent really need to do for you to truly own an invention, to stop others from using it? It's definitely more than just saying, hey, I invented something cool, isn't it?
Oh, much more. And it's a core principle, non-negotiable in patent law. It's written right into the law, 35 USC section 112A of the Patent Act. This part of the law basically says a patent application must include a written description of the invention and the way to make it and use it in such full, clear, concise, and exact terms as to enable any person skilled in the art to make and use the same. The idea behind it is really a trade-off, a quid pro quo. You, the inventor, get exclusive rights for a limited time, but in return, you have to fully disclose your invention to the public so others can learn from it. The key concept we keep coming back to is that the patent has to teach a person of ordinary skill in the art, we often just call them a POSITA, how to make and use the full scope of what you're claiming, and crucially, without needing undue experimentation. Now, think of this POSITA not as a Nobel laureate, but someone with reasonable standard knowledge and practical skills in that specific technical field. They're not a novice, but they're not expected to perform miracles either. The patent needs to give this skilled person enough info so they can actually practice the invention, not just understand it in theory. It's kind of a balancing act. You don't have to explain basic chemistry or standard lab procedures, everyone knows.
Right.
But you absolutely must explain the novel parts of your invention thoroughly enough so someone can replicate it.
Okay, so it's definitely not a secret recipe you keep locked away. It's much more like a really detailed, clear instruction manual. A recipe, like you said. But that brings up the big question. How much detail is actually enough? Where's that line between what's reasonable experimentation for this POSITA and what becomes undue? Because one person's routine adjustment might feel like years of research to someone else.
You've absolutely nailed the core challenge there, and that is exactly where the landmark case, In re Wands, comes into play. This was a decision from the Federal Circuit back in 1988, and it gave us this definitive, though not exhaustive, list of 8 factors. These are the factors courts and the Patent Office still use today to figure out when experimentation crosses that line from reasonable to undue. Before Wands, honestly, it was often a much more subjective call, less predictable. It left inventors and examiners kind of guessing in a gray area. This case was huge because it brought in a structured, multi-factor framework. For the first time, really, it added a level of objective analysis to this often fuzzy question of enablement. It was a really crucial step in standardizing how patent disclosures are judged.
So this isn't just some dusty old legal case sitting on a shelf somewhere. It's literally the foundation, the bedrock for how we've decided if inventions are properly described for, the last 30-plus years. It really set the standard.
Absolutely. And its relevance hasn't faded at all. In fact, it's been dramatically underscored, really reinforced very recently. You see, the Supreme Court's 2023 Amgen v. Sanofi decision, the big enablement case, explicitly pointed back to and reaffirmed the importance of these very Wands factors. That decision basically shone a huge spotlight back onto these factors, particularly in really complex and, frankly, often unpredictable fields like biotech. Fields where the claims can be incredibly broad and the science underneath is super nuanced. This wasn't just the court saying, yeah, Wands is still good law. It was a powerful signal, especially to biotech and pharma innovators, that the days of claiming massive functional territory with just minimal structural teaching, well, those days are pretty much over. It forces innovators to do more homework upfront, more R&D, which could definitely impact early-stage funding, and maybe even how discovery happens in these fields. The real insight here, I think, is how it pushes that burden of proof much earlier in the innovation cycle. You have to move from, we think this might work broadly, to, we can actually show how this works across a meaningful representative scope.
Wow, that's quite something. So even though these factors originated in 1988, they're not just relics. They're right there in the thick of today's biggest innovation battles, influencing strategic decisions for major companies. What do you think makes that Wands framework so durable, so relevant, even with technology changing so incredibly fast?
I think it's because the factors themselves are based on common sense, practical questions. They provide this flexible approach that can adapt. It asks things like, how much effort is needed? How clear are the instructions? What's the nature of the field? These are pretty universal questions, right? Whether you're talking about a new kind of gear shift or a complex antibody therapy, it gives a consistent way to look at things, even as the tech itself races ahead.
Okay, let's really get into the weeds then with these 8 factors. This is like the essential toolkit, right, for understanding enablement. A real deep dive into the criteria itself. Each one seems to play a part in figuring out if your patent truly teaches the invention, and ultimately if it'll stand up if challenged.
And what's crucial to grasp is that these aren't standalone items on a checklist. They interact dynamically. They're weighed together in this holistic way. No single factor just decides everything, although, sure, some factors can definitely carry more weight depending on the specific invention and how broad the claims are. It's not a scorecard, get 5 out of 8 and you pass. It's a comprehensive look at the overall teaching.
Right, got it. So let's dive into the first one, the quantity of experimentation necessary. How much actual trial and error does someone need to do based just on what's in the patent?
Okay, so this factor looks squarely at the effort that POSITA, our skilled person, would need to put in. If the experimentation is what we'd call routine tinkering, stuff that's expected in the field, maybe tweaking a known process slightly, selecting from a clear set of options, then that generally points towards enablement. For example, maybe optimizing a chemical reaction temperature by a few degrees, using standard equipment that's probably routine. But if getting the invention to work requires extensive, time-consuming, maybe non-obvious trial and error, basically forcing the POSITA to run their own mini research project just to find a working version well, that raises a big red flag for non-enablement. It's about whether they're making predictable adjustments or embarking on a long, uncertain quest.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually. But how does a court or an examiner at the patent office really draw that line between routine tinkering and undue experimentation? Is there like a number? Or is it always kind of subjective, depending on the specific technology?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no hard rule like, oh, if it takes more than 3 months, it's undue. It's not like that. Courts look at the whole picture, the context, the nature of the work involved. A key question is whether the experimentation requires inventive skill itself. Like, does the POSITA have to innovate just to make the patent instructions work? Or are they just applying known methods with expected results? For instance, if the patent basically says, build this custom machine from scratch, but gives no blueprints, that's likely undue. If it says, optimize this known temperature range by a few degrees using standard lab gear, that's probably routine. It really comes down to whether the patent is a starting point needing more invention or a reasonably finished guide. Okay, next factor. The amount of direction or guidance provided. Basically, how much hand-holding does the patent give that POSITA? This one digs into how clear and complete the patent document itself is. We're looking for concrete details. Step-by-step instructions, specific ranges for critical parameters, things like temperature, pressure, concentration, pH, maybe specific material types, clear conditions needed for the invention to work, detailed protocols. All these things significantly cut down the burden on the POSITA, making enablement much more likely. A well-written patent gives clear signposts, right? Not just vague ideas.
And then factor 3, the presence or absence of working examples. Are there actual concrete demos in the patent showing it works?
Yeah, working examples are incredibly powerful evidence for enablement, especially when you're dealing with unpredictable fields like biotech or complex chemistry. These are specific versions of the invention that the inventor actually made and used, ideally with data to back it up. Concrete, reproducible examples show that at least one way to practice the invention is definitely possible and disclosed. But it's not just about having one example, it's better to have representative examples. The more diverse these examples are, showing different variations or applications across the scope of what you're claiming, the stronger your enablement case becomes. They provide tangible proof.
Okay, that leads nicely into factor 4, the nature of the invention itself.
Yeah.
Does the kind of technology you're dealing with automatically change how much detail you need to provide?
Absolutely. The inherent nature of the field really sets the expectation for disclosure. For instance, biotech, chemical, pharma inventions. These often involve really complex, sometimes unpredictable interactions. Tiny changes at the molecular level can lead to huge, unexpected differences in how well something works, or its side effects. So these fields generally demand much more detailed disclosure compared to, say, mechanical or electrical inventions. Those can often be more predictable, their behavior might follow well-understood physical laws, so maybe less exhaustive detail is needed because the basic principles are clearer. Think about a new type of gear versus a new gene therapy.
Right, so if I invent a new kind of clamp or a circuit layout, the patent might need less explanation of basic physics than if I invent a new cancer drug where tiny variations are critical.
That's exactly. Spot on. Okay, factor 5, the state of the prior art. Can you lean on what's already known out there in the field to fill in some gaps in your explanation? Yes, you can, to a certain extent. And it's important for efficiency. If there are standard methods, common lab techniques, well-known scientific principles that already exist and are widely understood for certain steps or parts of your invention, your patent can refer to them. It can sort of lean on that existing knowledge without having to re-explain every single basic thing from scratch. That helps keep the patent focused. But, and this is key, if your invention really breaks new ground or uses non-standard, maybe unconventional methods for certain steps, then your patent has to provide much more detailed, self-contained instructions for those novel parts that the prior art doesn't cover.
Which brings us to factor 6, the relative skill of those in the art. How knowledgeable is this hypothetical person of ordinary skill in the art, the POSITA that you're writing for? Can a really smart POSITA make up for a patent that's maybe a bit thin on details?
Well, a higher baseline skill level in the field can mean the POSITA might tolerate slightly sparser instructions for routine things. They're expected to know the standard stuff, the common knowledge in their field. But, and this is a really important but, even a highly skilled POSITA cannot rescue claims that are fundamentally too broad or just poorly described, especially in those unpredictable areas. Their skill is a baseline for understanding what you did disclose and performing routine steps. It's not a magic wand that can fill in huge gaps or somehow enable a whole universe of possibilities you haven't actually taught. They do routine experiments, not undue ones. They don't invent for you.
Okay, that's clear. Now, factor 7 seems huge, especially for cutting-edge stuff. The predictability or unpredictability of the art. This must really influence how much detail is needed.
It's absolutely pivotal, and it often goes hand in hand with the nature of the invention and the quantity of experimentation factors we talked about. The less predictable the field, think drug discovery, where tiny molecular tweaks can have massive unforeseen effects, or maybe certain AI developments where outputs can be really random, the more detailed and extensive your disclosure has to be to enable the full scope of your claims. If you can't reliably predict how changing one thing will affect the outcome across your claimed invention, your patent needs to show a lot more. More diverse examples, maybe a deep explanation of the underlying mechanism that creates predictability across the scope. Without that, you risk non-enablement because the POSITA just can't reliably replicate or extend what you've taught.
And finally, factor 8, the breadth of the claims. How wide a net are you trying to cast? This feels like where a lot of inventors might get tripped up.
It's often a critical factor, sometimes the deciding one, in enablement fights. Simply put, the broader your claims, the heavier the burden on you to enable that entire scope. If you claim, say, a massive group of chemical compounds, like claiming all carbon-based molecules that do X instead of just this specific molecule, your patent has to enable that POSITA to make and use essentially all of them, or at least a truly representative number that clearly shows how to make and use the full scope without undue experimentation. This is where so many enablement challenges pop up. Inventors sometimes claim way more than they've actually taught how to make and use through their description and examples. Claiming wide is bold, but it demands equally broad and solid support in the patent itself.
Okay, so summing up this section, it's a complex balancing act. All these factors intertwine. A weakness in one might be offset by strength in another, but maybe a major weakness in a key factor, like claim breadth or unpredictability, could be really hard to overcome. It sounds like it's more dynamic than just a static score, is that right?
That's exactly it. It's a holistic view. The whole picture matters, and context is everything.
Okay, so we have these 8 factors, but knowing the list is one thing. How do courts actually use them when they're deciding a case? Is it like they pull out a scorecard and tally points? Okay, factor 1 is a maybe, factor 2 is a yes, that kind of thing.
No, not at all like a scorecard. And that's a really crucial point people sometimes miss. Courts don't just count up factors for and against enablement. Instead, they do this nuanced case-by-case analysis. They look at all the factors together as a whole picture. The fundamental question they keep asking is this. Considering the state of the art at the time and looking at what the patent actually discloses, would our POSITA, the person skilled in the art, have to perform undue experimentation to make and use the full scope of what's claimed? It's really about a practical, real-world assessment. Does the patent genuinely empower that skilled person, or does it leave them needing to do excessive, non-routine work?
So it's less about checking boxes and more about a deep evaluation of the practical reality for someone trying to actually use the invention. Does it truly empower them or just send them off on a wild goose chase?
That's a perfect way to phrase it. And this brings us to a concept that's absolutely central, and it's where that Amgen decision really hammered home an existing vital requirement: the need for full scope enablement. You have to enable the entire scope of your claim, not just your favorite examples, not just the corners you've explored most thoroughly. It's not enough to show one specific way works. You have to teach how to make and use the whole range of what you're claiming as your invention. Otherwise, you're basically claiming more than you've actually given back to the public in terms of know-how.
That feels like a really significant point, especially for inventors. So you can't just demonstrate one amazing antibody, for instance, and then try to claim thousands of variations without explaining how those other 999 actually work or how someone could reliably find them. Does this kind of requirement maybe discourage really ambitious early-stage research where the full breadth might still be, partly an educated guess? Are we potentially pushing inventors to disclose more than they reasonably can right at the beginning?
That's a very real tension, and it's a huge challenge, especially in cutting-edge fields. The Supreme Court really drove this home in Amgen v. Sanofi in 2023. They held that just providing a few examples and then basically giving a roadmap for finding and testing potentially millions of other candidates. Well, that does not enable a vast genus claim in an unpredictable field like antibody discovery. The court was really clear. Just giving a research plan, telling people how to go look for things that might work, this kind of prophetic enablement, that's not the same as actually teaching how to make and use the full invention you've claimed. You can't claim all possible solutions if your patent only shows how to get there in a very narrow way. For an inventor or maybe a startup, this means their initial patent strategy needs much stronger experimental backing right from the start. They need to move beyond just one hero result to a truly representative set of data. The insight, I think, is that the legal system is demanding a higher level of scientific certainty at the time you file if you want those broad claims. And yes, that could definitely impact the speed, the cost, maybe even the funding for bringing truly novel things like new therapies to market. It's not about stopping innovation, but making sure that patent bargain disclosure for protection is really fulfilled.
Yeah, that's a major clarification, especially like you said in fields where finding new functional molecules, antibodies, biologics is the core of the innovation. It definitely recalibrates the risk for companies in those spaces.
It really does. And this clear message from the Supreme Court has sent ripples right through the whole patent system. Following Amgen, the USPTO, the Patent Office, they issued specific guidance to their examiners. This guidance explicitly tells examiners to tie enablement rejections directly to the WANS factors, and this reinforced standard of full-scope enablement. So what that means in practice is that patent examiners are now looking much more closely, more rigorously at new applications, especially those with broad functional claims in fields known to be unpredictable. The bar has effectively been raised for applicants right at the initial review stage. They need more thorough disclosure up front.
So the impact of Amgen is being felt everywhere, from the very first look an examiner takes at an application, all the way through potential court battles later on. Innovators absolutely need to be aware of this higher standard for full scope enablement. Okay, let's make these concepts more concrete now with some real world examples. You mentioned we have 4 cases that really show how these WANS factors get applied, where enablement worked and where it didn't. This is where our deep dive analysis can really connect the theory to what actually happens in court.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is seeing how different factors seem to, move the needle in each case. It lets us see the holistic WANS framework in action and why having multiple factors is so important. Let's start with the case that gave us the factors. In WANS itself from 1988. Here, the invention was actually found enabled. The context involved claims for assays testing methods using high-affinity monoclonal antibodies. Now, it's important that at that time, monoclonal antibody tech, while still innovative, was becoming a relatively established field. There were known methods for making and using them. It wasn't completely uncharted territory. So the Federal Circuit found enabled. Why? They carefully went through the WANS factors. Critically, the quantity of experimentation needed, factor 1, was seen as reasonable. Why? Because the patent gave significant direction and guidance, factor 2, outlining steps, giving examples. Plus, the state of the prior art, factor 5, was already pretty strong for making antibodies, so POSITA could build on existing knowledge. The nature of the invention, factor 4, and its predictability, factor 7, were also decent. It wasn't totally speculative. And they had working examples, factor 3, showing it worked. All these factors together painted a picture of enough teaching.
All right, so in the original WANS case, it worked because the patent built on known science, gave clear instructions, had examples, and the field was reasonably predictable. It wasn't asking the POSITA to perform some huge leap of faith or independent research.
Exactly. It showed enablement across the claimed scope. Okay, now let's jump forward to that huge Supreme Court case we keep mentioning, Amgen Inc. v. Sanofi from 2023. Here, as we know, the claims were found not enabled. Remember the context. Amgen claimed a really broad group of antibodies based mainly on what they did binding a specific protein, PCSK9, and blocking it to lower cholesterol. The claims were functional, potentially covering millions of different antibody structures. The Supreme Court found them not enabled, their reasoning. Amgen basically gave a roadmap to find and test candidates, not instructions on how to reliably make and use the full breadth of that massive, unpredictable group. The breadth of claims, factor 8, was just enormous. The unpredictability of the art, factor 7, finding antibodies that work just right functionally, was very high. So the quantity of experimentation needed, factor 1, for the full scope was judged undue as like a massive research project. And they had very limited representative examples, factor 3, compared to the vast scope claimed, meaning not enough direction or guidance, factor 2, for the whole genus.
So Amgen basically said, here are a couple that work, and here's how to screen for potentially millions more. But the court said, nope, that's not teaching, that's just assigning homework. The few examples just couldn't support that massive claim scope. Seems like a fatal flaw for broad functional claims now.
Precisely. The claims have to match the teaching. Okay, next case. Wyeth and Cordis Corp v. Abbott Labs. This is from the Federal Circuit in 2013, another one found not enabled. This case involved claims for treating restenosis. That's when blood vessels narrow again after a procedure using rapamycin. Now, rapamycin is a broad class of related compounds, but the patent itself really only taught how to use one specific type, sirolimus. The Federal Circuit said not enabled. Why? Because to practice the full scope of the broad rapamycin claim, you'd have to make and test lots of other related compounds to see which ones actually worked for restenosis. The court decided that was undue experimentation given the limited teaching focused on just sirolimus. So the breadth of the claims, factor 8, was way too wide for the single example provided. The predictability, factor 7, for whether other rapamycin compounds would work similarly was low. Therefore, the quantity of experimentation, factor 1, needed for the full scope was too high. Not enough direction, factor 2, for the whole genus.
So it's a similar pattern to Amgen, right? Claiming a whole family of compounds, rapamycin, but really only showing how one specific member sirolimus works. You just can't extrapolate that broadly, especially in pharmacology, where things are often unpredictable.
You've got it. The claim scope has to be commensurate with the enabling disclosure. In our last example, ALZA Corp. v. Undrex Farms, LLC from the Federal Circuit in 2010. Also found not enabled. This one dealt with broad claims for controlled release versions of methylphenidate, the ADHD drug. The tricky part here was getting the drug to release into the body at specific controlled rates over time. The claims were found not enabled. The court said the patent just didn't provide enough direction or guidance, factor 2, for a POSITA to achieve all the different release profiles claimed across various formulations without undue experimentation. The chemistry involved in getting those release kinetics just right was deemed highly unpredictable, factor 7. Small formulation changes could have big, unexpected effects. So the quantity of experimentation, factor 1, needed to figure it all out was high and undue. Again, the breadth of the claims, factor 8, covering various release profiles, wasn't matched by the teaching provided. Trying different formulations became a burdensome task.
Wow. Okay, looking at these 4 cases together, it really paints a clear picture. That combination, broad claims, an unpredictable field, and not enough specific guidance or representative examples, that seems to be the recurring recipe for non-enablement. It really highlights the danger of claiming more than you can actually teach. So if you are an inventor, or you're working with one, how do you take all these lessons and actually use them proactively? How do you make sure your brilliant idea isn't just claimed, but is truly enabled, especially now with this tougher post-Amgen scrutiny? What's the practical playbook here?
Right. This is about getting strategic right from the drafting stage, building a patent application that anticipates these enablement challenges and is designed to overcome them. It's about building resilience into your IP from day one.
Okay, first rule, and maybe the most critical one now. Match your claim breadth to your actual teaching. Don't overclaim what you haven't genuinely enabled through your description and examples. If you want those broad genus claims, remember, claiming all seating furniture versus this specific chair. You absolutely must provide representative species, examples that genuinely span that genus. And crucially, you need to explain why they're representative. What structural similarities, what shared mechanism, what common parameters make them predictive across the genus. After Amgen just saying, here's one, go test to find more, is clearly not going to cut it for a broad, unpredictable functional claim. For anyone seeking investment or grants, showing this robust enablement early on is huge. It signals a well-thought-out strategy.
Right, making sure your reach doesn't exceed your grasp, basically. No more just hoping a POSITA can figure out the rest. Exactly. Second strategy, front-load your guidance. To actively reduce that quantity of experimentation factor, you need to pack your patent application with explicit, detailed instructions. That means including things like comprehensive step-by-step protocols, specific numerical ranges for important parameters, temperatures, concentrations, times, whatever is relevant, maybe even decision trees for different scenarios. Troubleshooting tips, expected results, or benchmarks. Think like you're writing a detailed lab manual or engineering spec sheet.
So it's about making the patent itself a genuinely useful practical guide, not just an abstract concept, like writing a really good repeatable instruction manual, which inherently reduces the effort someone else needs to put in.
That's a great way to think about it. Third, use working examples strategically. Don't just stop at one example, even if it's a perfect one. Include multiple, diverse examples that collectively cover different aspects or variations within your claimed scope. Especially in unpredictable fields, these concrete, reproducible examples are often the most decisive evidence for showing enablement across the entire breadth you're claiming. They act as tangible proof points, showing a POSITA can actually practice the invention in its various forms. Think of it as planting flags across the territory you're claiming.
Showing, not just telling, about the full scope through practical, varied demonstrations.
Yeah.
Got it.
Exactly. Fourth, leverage prior art explicitly. We touched on this. Your invention has to be new, obviously, but you can and should explicitly cite and reference standard methods, common techniques, or established principles from the prior art within your patent. This shows how your new contribution fits into the existing knowledge base. It reduces the need to explain every single routine step from scratch, making the patent more focused, and also lowering the perceived experimentation needed from the POSITA for those standard bits.
So you're not reinventing the wheel for every step, but clearly showing where your specific innovation connects to the established framework, using that shared knowledge smartly.
Precisely. Fifth tactic, plan a claim set that scales. This is a really smart strategic move. Combine broader independent claims with layers of narrower dependent claims. These dependent claims define specific subgroups or embodiments within your broader scope. This gives you flexibility later, during examination, or even in court. You might even plan ahead to file follow-on applications like continuations or divisionals to pursue broader scope later as you get more data. This approach means you protect what you know you can enable right now while keeping options open for future expansion. It's pragmatic and forward-looking. Sixth, document predictability. If your field or your specific invention is actually predictable, maybe there are well-understood structure-function relationships, or clear engineering principles involved, say so explicitly in your patent application. And crucially, back it up. Support it with data, with scientific principles, maybe cite relevant literature. This directly tackles those wants factors about the nature of the invention, factor 4, prior art, factor 5, and especially predictability, factor 7, providing that justification can be key to overcoming enablement challenges. And finally, number 7, and this is really important, anticipate the examiner and potential litigation. Think ahead. Act like you're already defending your patent. Internally, maybe create enablement maps or matrices. These would show exactly where each part of your claims is taught in your specification and which examples cover which parts of your claim scope. Having this kind of detailed preparation is incredibly valuable for responding effectively if an examiner raises a wands-based rejection or if you face an invalidity challenge in court down the road. Proactive documentation and a clear internal story are vital.
That's like building your defense from day one, not waiting until you're challenged. A really strategic long-term view of your IP, starting right from the drafting stage. Okay, so we know what good practices look like now. What about the flip side? What are the big no-nos, the common traps that can just sink an otherwise great patent application on enablement grounds? What mistakes do inventors often make, maybe without even realizing it?
Yeah, knowing these pitfalls is crucial for navigating patent law, especially now with this heightened focus after Amgen. Avoiding these can save inventors a huge amount of grief, time, money, maybe even losing their IP rights entirely. Okay, the first one, and probably the riskiest pitfall right now, particularly post-Amgen, is drafting those functional genus claims with thin teaching. This is when you claim a broad group of things purely by what they do, like an antibody that binds protein X and dysfunction Y, but you only provide maybe 1 or 2 specific examples and then just a vague screening roadmap for finding others. You are at extremely high risk of non-enablement here. You're claiming the whole forest, but only showing how to grow a couple of specific trees. That roadmap to try approach is just not enough if it demands undue experimentation for the POSITA to actually find the full scope you've claimed. This hits breadth, factor 8, predictability, factor 7, and quantity of experimentation, factor 1, hard.
Right, claiming what something does across a huge range without really showing how to make all of it work across that range. That's the big problem. It's like claiming all possible flying machines, but only describing a few paper airplanes and hoping someone else invents the jet engine based on that.
That's a great analogy. Second common mistake, having a one-species disclosure but claiming the whole genus. This is exactly what happened in that Wythe case we talked about. An inventor might fully describe just one specific version or species like Sirolimus, but then try to claim the entire family or class of related compounds like rapamycin and all its analogs. If that broader genus isn't predictably enabled just by looking at the single example, meaning the POSITA can't reliably figure out how to make and use the other members, you're almost certainly going to face a non-enablement problem. That single example just can't support the weight of the entire class without a clear reason why it should, hitting breadth, factor 8, and predictability, factor 7 again. Third trap, using hand-wavy parameters. This means putting vague or poorly defined terms in your patent description. Things like use a high temperature, or add a suitable catalyst, or an effective amount, or optimize the conditions. If you don't provide specific numerical ranges or clear process windows or guidelines on how to choose, you're just inviting arguments about undue experimentation. A POSITA needs concrete, actionable instructions, not guesswork. Vagueness in direction or guidance, factor 2, inevitably increases the quantity of experimentation, factor 1, often making it undue. Precision is key.
Yeah, it goes right back to that amount of direction factor. You need to be specific, clear, quantitative if possible, not just qualitative and fuzzy, leaving things open to interpretation.
Absolutely. And the final big pitfall, assuming POSITA skill cures everything. We know the skill of the person of ordinary skill in the art, factor 6, is a factor, but it has real limits. Many inventors mistakenly think, oh, anyone skilled in this field will figure it out, even if the disclosure is a bit lacking. But as cases like Amgen show, POSITA skill does not rescue claims that are fundamentally too broad or that deal with highly unpredictable science. A POSITA can do routine work, apply common knowledge, but they can't magically fill in huge gaps for an entire unenabled scope or overcome inherent unpredictability. Their skill isn't a substitute for a robust disclosure that actually addresses the nature of the invention, factor 4, and avoids undue experimentation, factor 1.
So you can't just rely on other smart people to make your potentially vague patent work. You, the inventor,
have to do the heavy lifting of detailed explanation yourself. The lesson seems to be specific, be detailed, don't assume too much. All right, so before you even think about hitting submit on that patent application, or maybe even as you're finalizing the invention disclosure itself, what's the quick gut check? What's the internal enablement checklist you should run through to feel more confident you're on solid ground?
Yeah, this is a fantastic essential step. Running through a quick internal checklist like this can spot potential weaknesses early before they become expensive headaches during an examination or, even worse, in court. Okay, first question to ask. Do we actually teach a POSITA to make and use every meaningful portion of our claim scope? Not just the best parts or the preferred versions, but the entire claimed range. If you claim temperatures from 10 to 100 degrees, can you show enablement across that whole range, not just at 20? This hits that full scope requirement head on. Second, are our working examples spread across the scope, or are they all clustered in one little corner, leaving huge parts untouched? Like we saw, a few examples in one spot won't support a broad claim, especially if the field is unpredictable. You need diversity in your examples. Third, have we provided clear operating conditions, specific ranges, detailed steps, maybe expected results, to really cut down the amount of guesswork and experimentation needed? This links right back to minimizing undue experimentation. The more precise you are, the better. Fourth, can we clearly point to established prior art methods that handle the routine steps, reducing the burden on our own disclosure? Smartly using that existing knowledge base makes your patent stronger and more efficient. Fifth, specifically in areas we know are unpredictable, have we added enough data or explained the underlying science, like the mechanism or structure-function relationship, to boost the sense of predictability? This is crucial for biotech chemistry. You need to provide a scientific reason why someone should expect your invention to work beyond just the specific examples you show. And finally, a really practical test. If we had to trim our claims, say by 20% or 40%, would the enablement objections likely disappear? If the answer is yes, that's a really strong signal you might be overclaiming right now. You should seriously consider adding those narrower claims immediately. It ensures you protect something valuable, giving you a fallback, rather than risking losing everything by reaching too far. Secure what you can reliably enable.
Okay, wrapping things up then, what we've really unpacked today in this deep dive analysis is that INRI WANS gives us this flexible 8-factor framework for figuring out undue experimentation under the patent law, under Section 112A. It's the foundation.
Right, but the absolute core takeaway, especially emphasized by that Amgen decision, is the critical need for full-scope enablement. Your patent has to teach that skilled person how to practice everything you claim, not just a few cherry-picked examples. Amgen really put the spotlight on the challenge this poses for broad functional claims in unpredictable fields, significantly raising the bar.
So to successfully navigate patent enablement today, it seems you absolutely must match the breadth of your claims with real depth in your teaching. That means solid, diverse examples, explicit instructions and guidance, and a smart claim strategy that truly lines up with what you can practically enable in your description. It's about empowering others to build on what you've done, not just staking a claim on unexplored territory. It really comes back to fulfilling that fundamental patent bargain, sharing knowledge effectively in exchange for protection.
And this deep dive into enablement, it does leave us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? How does this legal balancing act between encouraging inventors to claim broadly to protect their innovation sphere and requiring them to thoroughly teach what they've invented for public benefit? How does that balance actually impact the overall pace and direction of science and technology? Does having a stricter enablement standard, while it definitely promotes clarity and stops purely speculative claims, maybe inadvertently slow down or limit really ambitious early-stage research, especially in fields where true predictability might still be years away? It's something profound to mull over about the very nature of discovery and how we protect it in a world that's always changing.